Imagine standing alone in the Nevada desert. The ground is sun-bleached. The air feels heavy. The silence is so complete it almost becomes a sound of its own. Then, out of nowhere, that silence breaks. A white Boeing 737 cuts across the sky. No airline logo, no branding. Just a clean fuselage and a single red stripe running down the side. It drops toward a valley the U.S. government refused to officially acknowledge for decades. That plane is part of a classified fleet unofficially known as Janet. Every person on board holds top-secret clearance. Engineers, defense contractors, military personnel. People whose daily commute ends inside the most restricted airspace in America. And that destination has a name the entire world knows. Area 51. But here is the problem with Area 51. Most people think they already know what it is. They think of aliens, crash saucers, autopsy tables, hidden beings from another world. That is the legend. The reality may be even stranger. Because Area 51 is not terrifying because it might hide something non-human. It is terrifying because it reveals exactly what human beings are willing to build, bury, and protect when the stakes are power, war, and survival. And right now, that story is not ending. It is evolving. To understand why Area 51 still carries this kind of psychological weight, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to a moment when the United States felt blind, exposed, and deeply afraid. In the early years of the Cold War, the Soviet Union had become an intelligence blackout. The Iron Curtain did not just divide Europe, it sealed off information. American leaders feared they were missing something catastrophic. Nuclear expansion, bomber fleets, missile sites, the next surprise attack. Pearl Harbor was still fresh in the national memory. Nobody wanted to be caught unaware again. The United States needed eyes inside denied territory. Not diplomats, not rumors, not estimates. Proof. And that required an aircraft no one had ever built before. The CIA turned to Lockheed Skunk Works and its most legendary engineer, Clarence Kelly Johnson. His task was simple in wording and nearly impossible in practice. Build a plane that could fly so high, Soviet defenses could not touch it. But even if Johnson could build it, he still needed somewhere to test it. Somewhere isolated, somewhere empty, somewhere the public would never casually stumble across. In 1955, he found it. Groom Lake, a dry lake bed in the Nevada desert. Flat, hard, remote, and already tucked near one of the most secretive landscapes in the country, the Nevada test site. It was perfect. On paper, the location was identified through grid references, including the label Area 51. But Kelly Johnson knew that engineers did not dream about moving to an empty wasteland, surrounded by military secrecy. So he gave it a softer name, Paradise Ranch. It was a clever lie. And like many of the lies surrounding Area 51, it worked. Out there in the desert, the first great legend of Groom Lake took shape, the U-2 spy plane. The U-2 looked fragile. It was long-winged, narrow, and strange, almost more glider than jet. But its real power was altitude. It could climb above 70,000 feet, higher than any operational aircraft most people had ever imagined possible. That was exactly the point. Commercial airliners at the time flew far lower, military fighters lower still. So when the U-2 crossed the evening sky, it did something no one expected. It created UFO reports. As the sun dropped below the horizon, the earth beneath would fall into darkness. But the U-2, still high in the stratosphere, remained lit by sunlight. To pilots and witnesses below, it looked like a glowing silver object moving at an impossible altitude. And suddenly, the reports started pouring in. Unidentified flying objects. The military knew what people were seeing, but they could not say it. The U-2 was too important, too secret, too valuable. So the government did what it would keep doing for decades. It denied, it redirected, it explained away, and that matters more than people realize. Because the mythology of Area 51 was not born only from imagination, it was fed by official silence, by partial truths, by necessary lies, by a system that could never fully explain what people were seeing in the sky. That was the first layer. Then things got darker. In 1960, a Soviet missile shot down a U-2 flown by Francis Gary Powers. The message was blunt. Altitude alone was no longer enough. So the next phase began. If the United States could not stay safe by flying higher, it would try flying faster. That brought Area 51 into the era of Project Oxcart and the creation of the A-12. If the U-2 was elegant, the A-12 was ferocious. Built largely from titanium, the aircraft was designed to streak through the atmosphere at more than 3 times the speed of sound. At Mach 3, speed stopped being just a performance number. It became a materials problem. The skin heated up dramatically. Fuel had to be engineered for extreme conditions. Everything about the aircraft pushed against the physical limits of its time. The A-12 was a machine built for a world where information could prevent nuclear war. But even that was not enough forever, because speed, just like altitude, can be defeated. A faster missile changes everything. And once that reality became unavoidable, the logic of secret aviation took another turn. Not higher, not faster, invisible. That is where the story of Area 51 moves from impressive engineering into something closer to a revolution. One of the key theoretical breakthroughs came from an unlikely place, the Soviet Union. A physicist named Pyotr Ufimtsev published work on how electromagnetic waves scatter off surfaces. It was dense, mathematical, and mostly ignored by the Soviet system. But at Lockheed, people saw what it could become. If radar could be manipulated geometrically, then an aircraft might not need to overpower enemy defenses. It might simply avoid being seen by them in the first place. That idea led to one of the most radical aircraft designs ever built, the F-117 Nighthawk. The F-117 looked wrong, not futuristic in the graceful science fiction sense. Wrong in a harsher way. Sharp edges, flat facets, a body shaped less by airflow than by radar mathematics. Pilots joked that it looked like a diamond that should not be able to fly. And in one sense, they were right. The aircraft was aerodynamically unstable. It relied on fly-by-wire computers, making constant corrections just to remain controllable. In earlier eras, it would have been nearly impossible to operate, but by the time it emerged from black project testing, that instability had become acceptable, because radar invisibility changed the rules. That kind of testing needed darkness, isolation, and total secrecy. Area 51 was built for exactly that. Aircraft were moved in pieces, flights were hidden, operations were compartmentalized. What the public did not know, foreign intelligence could not easily confirm. And while the outside world obsessed over rumors, Area 51 kept becoming more important. Because it was not only a place for American prototypes, it was also a place for studying the enemy. During the Cold War, the United States secretly acquired Soviet-built aircraft, including MiG fighters. At Groom Lake and related test programs, American pilots flew against them in mock combat. They learned how those aircraft turned, where they bled energy, how their radars behaved, how their tactics could be broken. This was not mythology. This was practical high-stakes intelligence, and it worked. The point of Area 51 was never simply to invent. It was to understand, to test, to compare, to reduce uncertainty before real combat ever began. But that total secrecy came with a cost, and this is where the image of Area 51 becomes harder to romanticize. In the 1990s, a lawsuit brought one of the base's ugliest alleged realities into public view. The case involved workers and the families of contractors who claimed they had been exposed to toxic burn pits used to destroy classified materials. According to the allegations, trenches were used to burn unknown substances, including industrial chemicals and materials associated with highly sensitive aerospace programs. Workers described thick smoke drifting across the base. Some later developed severe illnesses. Families demanded answers. What exactly had been burned? What had these men inhaled? What were they exposed to? And the government's answer was, in effect, this: we cannot tell you. Not because the question was irrelevant, because the answer itself was considered secret. The Air Force invoked the state secrets privilege. The argument was chilling in its logic. Even disclosing the chemical identity of burned materials, officials argued, could reveal something meaningful about classified aircraft, coatings, or vulnerabilities. This is sometimes described through the logic of mosaic theory. One small piece of information may seem harmless, but to an adversary collecting fragments, it could complete the picture. So the case was walled off. The courts accepted that the underlying facts could not be fully opened without risking national security. A presidential exemption later insulated the location from certain environmental disclosure requirements. And just like that, a familiar pattern repeated itself. Sickness, questions, secrecy, silence. This is one reason Area 51 never became just another military base in the public imagination. Because it was not merely hidden. It existed in a zone where normal rules seemed to bend. And when a place acquires that aura, mythology rushes in. That is where Bob Lazar enters the story. In 1989, Lazar appeared on Las Vegas television and made claims that would permanently fuse Area 51 with extraterrestrial lore. He said he had worked at a facility called S4 near Groom Lake. He described hidden hangars, alien craft, and efforts to reverse engineer propulsion systems that defied conventional physics. He claimed these craft were powered by element 115. He described technology that seemed to bend gravity itself. And the story exploded because it arrived at exactly the right moment. The public already distrusted official explanations. The base already carried an aura of total secrecy. UFO culture was already woven into American life. Lazar did not create that landscape. He stepped into it, and millions of people followed. But as investigators dug deeper, the story began to fracture. Academic records could not be verified. Employment claims did not hold up cleanly. Scientific details that sounded revolutionary became far less convincing under scrutiny. Later work on element 115 did not validate the sweeping conclusions his story implied. That does not mean every believer disappeared. Far from it. Because Area 51 had already crossed a cultural threshold. At that point, the base no longer belonged only to the government. It belonged to the imagination. And in a strange way, that may have helped the real mission. Because while the world argued about aliens, it paid less attention to stealth development, reconnaissance, material science, electronic warfare, and the next generation of classified aerospace programs. That is the paradox of Area 51. The fantasy may have protected the reality. But here is where the story changes again. For most of its history, secrecy meant distance. Remote desert, closed gates, controlled access, compartmentalized knowledge. That model no longer works the way it used to. We now live in the age of open-source intelligence, commercial satellite imagery, digital flight tracking, infrared observations, public records, civilian researchers with tools that would have looked like science fiction to intelligence officers in the 1960s. Area 51 is still secret, but it is no longer invisible. And that has created a new kind of battlefield, one where governments are not just hiding from rival states, they are hiding from the Internet. Enthusiasts and analysts now monitor the Nevada test and training range constantly, They study satellite images. They compare construction changes. They track Janet flights. They map where transponders disappear. They watch the edges of restricted airspace and build patterns from absence itself. That may sound obsessive. It is. But it is also effective. Over the last few years, satellite imagery has shown major changes around Groom Lake, including large new structures and infrastructure expansion. Some observers believe these developments may be connected to next-generation aircraft testing. Others suggest the facilities could support large unmanned platforms, advanced stealth systems, or programs not yet publicly acknowledged. That distinction matters, because some things are visible, but what they mean is still open to interpretation. And that is exactly what makes modern Area 51 so fascinating. It lives in the space between evidence and uncertainty. Take the Janet flights. These aircraft are no secret in the literal sense. People can see them. They depart from Las Vegas. Their red stripe is famous. Their routes have been tracked for years. But the closer they get to Groom Lake and related restricted zones, the less visible everything becomes. Call signs shift. Tracking coverage changes. Public visibility narrows. Researchers have used those disappearances to infer operational boundaries. Again, not pure proof, but not fantasy either. This is how Area 51 works in the 21st century. It leaves outlines, shadows, gaps that are just detailed enough to trigger serious analysis and just incomplete enough to prevent certainty. And sometimes, those gaps become even stranger. In 2025, reports emerged around a classified aircraft crash near the broader testing region east of the Area 51 security boundary. Publicly available information pointed to a rapid security response and a tightly controlled recovery effort. Later, accounts surfaced suggesting possible tampering or unusual objects found near the site, leading to speculation about who had been there and why. Was it civilian interference? A reckless attempt to get close to something restricted? A foreign intelligence probe? A staged deception? The truth remains unclear. But that ambiguity is the point. Area 51 is no longer just protected by fences and guards. It is protected by noise, by uncertainty, by a flood of partial data that makes outsiders work constantly to separate signal from misdirection. And that raises a harder question. What exactly is being protected now? Because the strongest evidence suggests Area 51 is no longer only about exotic aircraft in the old Cold War sense. It appears to be part of something broader, a system of testing, integration, and strategic experimentation that reaches from the atmosphere into space. That is where current speculation becomes most intense. Programs tied to sixth-generation air dominance, autonomous systems, advanced thermal management, low observable design, sensor fusion, and cross-domain warfare all point in one direction. The future battlefield will not be divided neatly between air, land, sea, cyber, and orbit. It will be fused. Some analysts have connected recent Area 51 activity to this wider shift, especially as the United States pursues increasingly ambitious missile defense and aerospace programs. Public discussion around concepts such as large-scale layered defense, rapid sensing networks, autonomous targeting support, and orbital infrastructure has only intensified that interest. And once you reach that level, Area 51 stops looking like a relic of the Cold War. It starts looking like a prototype for the next era, a place where aircraft are not just aircraft anymore, where satellites are not just satellites, where software, sensors, thermal signatures, stealth geometry, electronic deception, and machine-speed decision systems all merge into a single military ecosystem. That may sound abstract. It is not. Because when military systems become faster, more autonomous, and harder to interpret, the margin for error shrinks. Misreading intent becomes easier, escalation becomes faster, and secrecy becomes even more dangerous, not less. In the old world, the nightmare was being surprised by bombers or missiles you could not see. In the new world, the nightmare may be interacting with systems you barely understand until they are already making decisions at machine speed. That is why Area 51 still matters. Not because it is a museum of old secrets, because it may be one of the places where the next strategic reality is being rehearsed before the public can even name it. And this is the part most people miss. The enduring mystery of Area 51 is not really about whether something impossible is hidden there. It is about the scale of what governments will conceal when they believe the future balance of power depends on it. That is the real story. Not aliens, not silver saucers, not cartoon conspiracies. The real story is a desert installation that helped create the U-2, pushed the A-12, shaped stealth warfare, tested against enemy aircraft, buried parts of its own history behind legal walls, and now sits at the center of a world where secrecy is harder to maintain and more important than ever. Area 51 is a symbol because it earned that status. It represents technical brilliance, institutional paranoia, strategic necessity, public distrust, and the uncomfortable fact that some of the most consequential developments in modern history happen far from oversight and long before they are publicly understood. And maybe that is why the place still unsettles people. Because deep down, we know what it means. It means there are moments when nations decide that openness is too dangerous, truth is too expensive, and secrecy is the only acceptable operating system. So they build in the desert, they fly in the dark, they deny what they can, they classify what they cannot deny, and they keep going. The mystery of Area 51 is not that it might hide visitors from another world. The mystery is what our own world becomes when power operates beyond visibility. And somewhere out there, beyond the orange posts and the dry lake bed, beyond the cameras and the silence, that next chapter may already be taking shape in the sky.